Good evening. My name is Eric Austin. I am the director of the Wheeler Center. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you this evening to this event, this conversation with Ambassador Baucus. When we started to plan for this event, we knew it would be popular. We were optimistic that we might be able to allocate all the seats that we had set aside in the original 300-seat space in Gaines Hall. When we decided to move it to this larger venue, we were hopeful that there would be a positive response to that. I think, unfortunately, the smoke has done some folks in. Many of you probably know, if you were looking at our ticket site, that has been sold out for the last couple of days. So hopefully we'll see a few more, but unfortunately, I think the weather and the smoke has done a few in. The Wheeler Center, as many of you probably know, is the only policy center in the state that is not focused on a single issue or a narrow set of related issues. And as a result, the Wheeler Center is in sort of the unique position to focus on any of the range of issues that arise here in the state and that are of interest or are important to the citizens of Montana. 2018 for the Wheeler Center really marks an important milestone for us. It will be the 30th anniversary of the center itself and the beginning of our programs. And the mission of the Wheeler Center around that to discuss and analyze and hopefully contribute to the resolution of some of the critical issues that are of concern to the citizens of the state. So I'm a political scientist, and as a political scientist, often when I start my courses, when I start with a sort of a working definition of politics, and that working definition suggests that politics, and I want to reclaim politics. I'd like politics to not be a bad word any longer. I know that's a high bar, but that's my aim, right? And so I sort of start with a classical definition of politics that is about the identification and the pursuit of the good life, right? And as Montana has grown, as its population has become more diverse, as its economy has grown and become more diverse, as the issues and concerns that face the state have become broader, I think the kinds of conversations that the Wheeler Center strives to convene are increasingly important for us. As the center looks into the next 30 years of its operations, as the state looks further into the 20th century, I can't think of a better person to continue that conversation with than Ambassador Baucus, who brings 40-plus years of experience and focus in politics, the kind of politics that I'm talking about, right? Focusing on the good life, what it is to be the good life or to achieve the good life for the citizens of Montana. And so I'm very excited to welcome him here this evening to have that conversation with us. Before we proceed too far, I do want to thank and acknowledge a number of folks that are not only critical to bringing this event about tonight, but a number of the Wheeler Center's activities. The first of whom is Chuck Tooley, who is a member of our board. Chuck has known the ambassador for a number of years, and without his efforts, this event simply wouldn't happen. So, Chuck, could you stand up for a moment? Second, many of you made contributions to the Wheeler Center when you reserved your ticket. So to those of you who did that, thank you very much. The Wheeler Center is a nonprofit organization, and we are able to produce these kinds of events largely because of the generous donations that our supporters make. So as you think about, and we move towards the end of this calendar year, and you're considering other charitable donations that you might want to make before the end of the year, please keep the Wheeler Center in mind. But again, to those of you who did contribute this time around, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Lastly, I also want to acknowledge the long and strong relationship that the Wheeler Center has had with Montana State University. really starting at the department level with my current department chair, Frankie Willemer, with our former department chair, Linda Young, our Dean of Letters and Sciences, Nickel Ray, who will be joining us on stage here in a moment, all the way to the president of the university, Dr. Cruzado, who has been a real champion of the Wheeler Center and our activities. These individuals and many others around the university recognize and really understand the links between the mission of the Wheeler Center and that of the university. And although I think synergy gets overused and sort of abused as a term, I think synergy is a good description of the relationship between the Wheeler Center and the university. And we really appreciate that relationship and look forward to continuing it into the next decades of our operations. One last logistical note. At the end of Ambassador Baucus's comments and discussion, we will have some time for question and answer from the audience. The way that we're going to run that is that we will have 2 microphones. I'll have a couple of runners that will be working up and down the 2 aisles here in the room. We'll try and take your questions as much in order as we can, but we'll pass the mic to wherever you happen to be sitting. We'll ask you to rise, ask your question. We'll get that on, and as you probably noticed, we're capturing the event this evening on video and audio, so we can capture your questions. And we'll try and get through as many of those questions as we can this evening. So we will have a little bit of that time as we wrap up or before we wrap up. At this point, please join me in welcoming President Waded Cruzado to the stage to welcome our guest and to introduce our honored guest as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Austin, for your gracious introduction. And Dr. Austin has been very generous this evening, recognizing a number of individuals, and I think that I have to let this public know, this audience know, that in Dr. Austin we have one of the finest faculty members and researchers at Montana State University. And as a member of the board of the Wheeler Center, I need to say we're honored to have him as our director, and we're happy, very happy with his leadership. Thank you so much, Dr. Austin. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your university, Montana State. We are absolutely delighted to have you with us tonight. It is also my honor to welcome back to Montana, to the Bozeman community, and to Montana State University, tonight's esteemed guest and his wife. I should begin by saying the timing for tonight's event is certainly appropriate, for it kicks off a very important academic year in the history of Montana State University. Eric mentioned the importance of the year of 2018 for the Wheeler Center. Well, in February of 2018, our university will celebrate its 125th anniversary. We often talk about our history as Montana's oldest university by one day. I know I have some friends from Missoula here. Our heritage as a land-grant institution, and our university's commitment to our core value of service in the people's interests. And service to the people of Montana is something that tonight's guest deeply understands. Max Baucus began his long and very distinguished career in public service back in 1973, when he was elected to the Montana House of Representatives. In 1974, he successfully ran for the U.S. House of Representatives by utilizing an unusual campaign strategy. He walked 630 miles from Gardner to Yak, meeting with and listening to Montanans. He was elected as Montana's U.S. Senator in 1978 and served until President Barack Obama appointed him in January 2014 as Ambassador of the United States of America to the People's Republic of China. At the time of his appointment, he was Montana's longest-serving senator, as well as the third longest tenure among those serving in the U.S. Senate. While in the Senate, Ambassador Baucus was chairman and ranking member of the powerful Senate Committee of Finance. He shared that same chair with the person who founded land-grant universities, Justin Smith Morrow, who was the first chair of that committee. While chairman, he was the chief architect of the Affordable Health Care Act, which was signed by President Barack Obama into law on March the 23rd, 2009. Ambassador Baucus has extensive experience in international trade. As chairman of the Senate Committee of Finance, he led the passage and enactment of the free trade agreements with 11 countries: Australia, Bahrain, Jordan, Chile, Colombia, Morocco, Oman, Panama, Peru, Singapore, and South Korea. He also was deeply involved in orchestrating the congressional approval of permanent normal trade relations with China in 2000, and in facilitating China's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Ambassador Baucus also served as vice chairman of the Senate Joint Committee on Taxation and as a member of the Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, where he led the reauthorization of numerous farm bills. Thank you so much. Additionally, he was a member of the Senate Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, the Super Committee, following the financial crisis of 2008. Ambassador Baucus was also a member of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works and chaired its subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, where he managed numerous legislative acts and highway bills. As ambassador to China, he served from February 21, 2014 until January 19, 2017. What a remarkable trajectory, and what a devoted statesman. We're very proud to say that Ambassador Baucus and his wife, Melody Haynes, have chosen to make their home in Gallatin County, and we look forward to seeing them both frequently on campus. I also would like to introduce tonight Dr. Nicole Ray, Dean of the MSU College of Letters and Science, who will moderate tonight's conversation. In addition to being a skilled administrator, Dr. Ray is a respected and talented political scientist whose scholarship is frequently cited. The author of 5 books on American politics, Dr. Ray's research interests focus on American national political institutions, comparative political parties and party systems, European government and politics, and conservative politics. He holds a doctorate in politics from Oxford University and an undergraduate degree in politics from Edinburgh University. With no further delay, please join me in warmly welcoming back to Montana and to the Bozeman community the U.S. Ambassador to the People's Republic of China, the retired senior U.S. Senator from Montana, and our friend, my friend, who, as we all know, likes to be called simply Max.
All right. Glad very much. Very nice of you.
Thank you.
Really nice.
Thank you, sir.
You want over here? Where do you want me?
The further one. Well, good evening, everybody, and Ambassador.
Nick?
President Cruzado reminded us that over 40 years ago, your first campaign, you walked the first congressional district. And so I'd like to kick off by just asking you, what did you learn about campaigning and about the state of Montana from that campaign, and how had things changed by the time you stopped campaigning?
How much time do we have? Well, first, I just want to thank all of you, Wheeler Center, MSU, President Cruzado, Nick, Eric, everybody. We're very happy, Mel and I, to be here. We've been away from home a bit, although representing the state home all the time. But it feels so good to finally be rooted in one spot, and not Washington, D.C., or in Beijing, be here at home. So we want you to know how happy we are to be here in Montana. I also want to introduce my wife, Mel, and I do that in part because she's just such a wonderful person. But I'm reminded years ago at a program here at MSU, I've forgotten his name, a wonderful guy. He was a short fellow. He was an icon here at MSU. When he spoke, somebody praised him to the hilt, and he said, "Y'all, behind every successful man, there's a surprised wife." I don't know how surprised Mel is. I don't know how successful we are, but anyway, I loved it when I heard that years ago here. Gosh, that's public service has kind of been my calling. If we had a psychiatrist here, maybe he or she could kind of tell us why. I don't know. But partly, I feel very lucky in life. Great parents. I grew up on a ranch in Montana here, close to the land, able to go to schools I wanted to go to. So far, good health. I mean, I'm really lucky. And so part of me is trying to give some of that back. And in addition, when I attended an overseas college program in France. At the end of the 6 months, I realized I had not learned anything. It was an experimental program. It really was not much. And so I decided, why come back home? Stay overseas. So I have a knapsack in my back, a little handbag, and I hitchhiked around the world for a year, to Europe and Africa and Asia. Got sick of the dog a couple of times, met a lot of terrific people. It was during that trip, and I know kind of where it was, then Belgium and Congo. It was an epiphany, it just sort of hit me, that this world's getting smaller, our natural resources are diminishing, and somehow we got to work better together if we're going to have better lives. It's just going to take a deeper joint commitment if that's going to happen. That planted a seed for a later interest in public service. I did not realize it at the time, but looking back, I know that had a lot to do with it. And then things happened, and so on and so forth. I decided that I wanted to run for public office. A person I revere is Mike Mansfield. I asked his advice, and he strongly encouraged me to come back home and run. He said it takes a lot of shoe leather, it takes a lot of hard work, it takes a little bit of luck. That's all he said, really. Mike doesn't say much. But I knew what he meant, and so when I decided to run for the House, the thought of using a little shoe leather appealed to me, and to walk. We Montanans, we're outdoors people. We love the outdoors. I love the outdoors. I like being outdoors. And so part of it was just being outdoors, is walking across our state, enjoying the state, seeing people, and so on and so forth. I ate like a horse. I lost 12 pounds. People were, for the most part, very, very generous. Just between here and Livingston, interstate went through the place now, but my gosh, knocked on the door. It was a Sunday family dinner. And, come on in, Max. Sat down, a great big dinner, and the woman, this lady's mother, gave me a big sack of groceries to put me on my way, and so on and so forth. So it was what I learned, that people are really good for the most part, and you just look for the ways you kind of connect with people. On occasion, I met somebody who really gave me a hard time. It really only happened over in Lake County. Down the highway, and there are the missions. I come down the highway there, and holy mackerel, a couple of guys there really turned my head off. This is part of MOD, Montana's Against Official Discrimination. A lot of tribal tension up there in Lake County. And you know, so I talked to him, this and that. It's also interesting, one part up near Libby, walking along, gajillion stories we don't have time to mention tonight. But one fellow, older guy, he said, well, Max, I don't know. Okay. But don't be another China Mike, referring to Mike Mansfield. And I knew what he meant. Okay, I appreciate it. That's what you said. But I picked up a little bit of resentment in Montana against anybody in our state public servant who maybe was too close to foreign policy, not enough to be in Montana and that kind of thing. Anyway, loved it. And to be honest, I think I'm sitting here right now in part because of that walk. To be very candid, I was facing two primary opponents, Pat Williams and Arnold Olson. Pat was the darling of the Democratic Party. Organized labor, environmentalists, Democratic Party. Arnold Olson had served a few years earlier. You know, Dick Shoup had defeated Arnold Olson. And so, who am I? I'm this kid from Montana, from Helena. My parents are Republicans. And how am I going to get to first base in the Democratic primary? Nobody knows me. I've got to find some way to separate myself from the others. And so I know that that helped, as walking helped establish that separation. As I walked, there was more and more interest. People would walk out, meet me. And newspapers and TV stations would come out to follow me as I got closer to town. I prided myself, and I walked every step of the way. The rules I'd set up were just that. Walk every step. Now I could get in a car and go back to where I'd been. I could get a ride back to where I stopped walking. But once I got that point, I'm walking. Now, the interesting question, what about side trips? Going to the side, not going forward. And so I had to kind of be careful about that. But I walked every step as a matter of pride, and I'll stop here, but anyway. I was walking up Paradise Valley, and you know, there are a few folks there, but not a lot, really. Well, you know, the goal here is to meet people, talk to people. And so, well, here's a road off on the side. Well, why not? So I just walking up this road and turned on the corner, knocked on the screen door of this house. Who should come to the door but legislator Pete Story, who represented that part of the state. Mac, come on in, Max. Good to see you and all that. So we had a cup of coffee and talked a bit. And then he said, I'll tell you what, Max, there's not many people around here. I'll tell you what I'll do for you. I'll give you a ride up the road about 20, 30 miles, and I won't tell a soul. I really thought to myself, you'll tell everybody. Not going to do that. And that happened a couple times. People, I don't know if they're friends, they're trying to tempt me to do something I should not do.
Right.
And I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. So anyway, it was wonderful.
During your 40 years or so in Congress, what were the biggest changes that you noticed on Capitol Hill? And I mean, why do you think that Congress is held in such low esteem by the American public?
Yeah, well, it has changed. When I arrived in the Senate, you know, Mike Mansfield had just left. And the Secretary of the Senate was a Montanan, Stan Kimmett. Stan Kimmett worked for Mike, and then he's Secretary of the Senate. And when I arrived, Stan was wonderful. I mean, just all these stories. I mean, we had breakfast together as soon as I arrived. Nobody in the Senate dining room but for us, Stan and myself, and way over on the side was Senator Stennis, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee from Mississippi. Stan said, come on, Max, let's get up and go meet the chairman. Fine. So we walk over to meet Chairman John Stennis. And this was such a lesson for me. John Stennis, partly because he's a Southern gentleman, jumped out of his chair. He said, "Young man, so happy to meet you." And I thought to myself, what a gracious thing to do, to always get up, always get up. When somebody comes over, I don't care who it is, you get up and show respect to that person. And I've tried to do that always, because I just think it's important to show connection, respect. But anyway, then Stan asked me to introduce me and take me back to there's a room. It's kind of the old one, what it was. Senator Jim Eastland, another big fancy, not fancy, old bowl from Mississippi. That's where the old bowls had bourbon late in the afternoon. And I went in there and I was felt honored. My gosh, I can sit down and have some whiskey with some of these guys. I'm just this new kid in the block, And anyway, it's gone. That was starting to fade away when I arrived. But it was an opportunity for people to get together and just compare notes. Hey, Sam, how you doing? What's your kid doing these days? What about that bill we're talking about? You going to bring that up or not? What do you think? People started to connect with each other. And we also had back then a private senator's dining room. There's the ordinary senator's dining room. The private was just off on the side. Only senators, no spouses, no staff, nobody. And it's wonderful. I look forward to it a couple, 3 times a week. I go there for lunch. And by priority, just talking, comparing notes and this and that. And it's really good. That's gone now. Nobody goes anymore. Why? Because now, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, each party has its political luncheons. Plotting strategy, how they're going to defeat those awful people down the hall, both ways. And we're fundraising, out fundraising. The biggest change, I think, is the additional money in politics today. When I first ran in '78, the Senate, I raised and spent $600,000. Every 6 years, that doubled. 1, 2, 2, 4, 4, 8. And now the milk helped the last race. $24 million raised and spent. It's wrong. It's nuts. But you have to do it. You have to raise it because that's the system. Otherwise, it's a unilateral disarmament. And it's very pernicious. It takes away our time. I found, too, that with each succeeding race, I had less control over my campaign. Outsiders had more control with all the money, and the ads and whatnot. It's a problem. Clearly, it's Citizens United, Supreme Court, et cetera. What's it going to take to change it? Change the Supreme Court. Hard to amend the Constitution, but it may be like Watergate. There's a big change in Watergate because there's too much money being spent. That's what caused, I think, the break-in, cover-up, and all that in part because it had so much money comparatively back then. I tend to think that we may have to face another crisis where there's so much money that it's spent fraudulently. It just in a way that's going to finally wake people up. But that's a big change. I can go on forever. Other major changes are just advances in technologies. Senate televised. Senators, therefore, would spend a little more time talking to their constituents, not to senators. Speeches on the Senate floor are not related. Speeches to persuade a colleague to do this or do that. Those days are pretty much gone. Instead, they're talking to the floor. Or they're making statements, this and that. I always knew when Ted Stevens from Alaska would come to the floor, it'd be late afternoon because that was prime time in Alaska. And so it's, and social networking, oh gosh, it's just terrible. It's just, and we're atomized in my judgment. We just, and also the media, it's so bad that TV studios, newspapers, in order to keep paying attention to the bottom line, have to run more ads, have a smaller news hole, pay less to reporters, fewer reporters. Major national journalists hate it because there are about 4 or 5 news cycles a day. They have no time to get the depth. They want to do what's right, most of them, but on a time. It's just terrible. In addition, people tend to watch either Fox News or CNN. It's just so much easier to watch somebody you tend to agree with. I remember a long time ago, I was over at the Baxter Rotary Luncheon, and it was a long time ago, and somebody asked me, Max, what newspaper columnist do you read? Where do you get good information? And my answer was, well, depends whether you want to reinforce your bias or whether you want to learn something. And it just, there's insufficient critical thinking today. People just take what they see and don't question it, examine it, decide for themselves, is this right or not right? But we're a great country, you know, and we are, I mean that. I'm not just throwing that out. And it's, in life, you deal with what your conditions are and what the situation is, and you make the most of it. You just make it work.
I'm sure we have some MSU students out there, so would you still encourage our students to think about a career in public service?
Absolutely, absolutely. I loved it. I have no regrets. I think the most noble human endeavor is service. Service to church, to synagogue, to community, to friends, to family. It's service. And our public service. It's just those who are serving others, I think, are more rewarded in life than those who are not. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. In fact, I'm trying to put together, I'm sorry, well, it's over the other campus. An institute over there. One of my goals is to encourage younger people to get public service. I went down to Monterey, California, to talk to Leon Panetta. He's got the Panetta Institute down there. And they're doing something I'd like to put together in Montana, statewide. Namely, I'll tell you what they do. They recruit students from the California college system, not the university, but the college system. Take 20. Then in Monterey, they invite inspirational speakers like Colin Powell and others, and then give them classes, send them back afterwards to Washington, work in various California congressional offices for 3 months, and with classes and this and that, and getting them involved in public service. I think it's so important because I think fewer people today are interested in public service probably than maybe was the case years ago. Absolutely. I loved it. I have no regrets.
Let's go to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Your junior congressional career, your congressional career spanned 7 administrations,
right,
from I think Ford to Obama. Which one of those presidents impressed you most?
They're all different. And they impressed in different ways. I think it struck me. I just arrived in the House. President Ford invited new House members. This is a Watergate class of 74 up to them for breakfast, and it's really interesting. He talked about something. Then he had Henry Kissinger kind of explain what was going on, and it was all over. I couldn't believe it. Suddenly, there's a rush. All these new, sophisticated young members of Congress, they grabbed the paper placemats and rushed up to get President Ford's autograph. I thought, what's going on here? It's, okay, he's our president. I don't care about his autograph. Anyways, Ford was very good. Ford was he's a decent guy, liked him. Jimmy Carter's very different. Jimmy Carter's an engineer first, second and third. I'll stop there. And we all get our public spirited juices flowing once in a while. So during the Melez period, Jimmy Carter's presidency, I called up the White House and said, Mr. President, I'd like to come up to Camp David. He's having all his folks up to Camp David. He's got to figure out how to deal with Melez. Inflation was, interest rates were 20%. I can remember talking to Paul Volcker, who's chairman of the Fed, just giving, I was angry. I said, look, we're a small business state. We can't afford 20% interest rates in Montana. The big boys, big banks in other states, we just can't. You got to do something about that. And he just looked at me. But anyway, during that Melez period, I called up the president and said, I'd like to come up to Camp David, give you my 2 bits, how to get us going back together again. And he says, okay, fine. And then one day, Sunday morning, phone rang. It was the president. Said, Max, can you come up to the White House? And I'll see you between Sunday school and church. I know you want to see me. Great. I said, what time? He gave me the time. I like to run. I said, I got time to go for a little run. I was out running. Holy mackerel. He gave me the wrong time. So I turned around and how fast I could, and I didn't have a chance to shower, and I broke all the speed limits. I got over to the White House. And just in time, and he had his prayer book. We were going off to church. Got in the limousine off to the First Baptist Church. Anyway, then we went to his church, and then and he knew all the answers at the Sunday school. But he tried not to raise his hand too much. And anyway, the teacher would say, I forgot what the lesson was, but the teacher had questions, and President Carter. And so, okay, Max, let's go have time. He got up, and all the Secret Service got up, off we go in the room, and a chance for me to see what I thought. Well, I didn't have much to say, really, but except that all I said, was just very basic, Mr. President, you are the president. You're the leader of our country. People want to look up to you. They want to look up to you as president and to you personally. You're our president. And just lead, say what you think, connect with people, but just lead it. I know, he just looked at me, and that was that. And so, anyway. Reagan is really interesting. I liked Ronald Reagan a lot, frankly. A couple of times, they'd go up to the White House. He was the first one to use cue cards. So he's in the cabinet room there, and all the senators around the table. And he didn't really know his stuff that much. So he'd pick up these cards and just read from his cue cards. And that's fine. But Democratic senators spoke very disparagingly about that. They were outraged. How could the President of the United States not know enough about his subject and have to read from cue cards? They're very superior, Democratic senators. It just, some hubris there. I mean, come on. But the thing is, almost every other president followed that procedure. George Bush, H. Bush did, George W. Bush did. Clinton did not. Obama did not. But Reagan used cue cards. He was a great storyteller. One time we're up there, really the big question was NAFTA, way back then. And I was the most junior guy in the room, so it came around to me at the end of the table. And I started out by saying something pretty lame like, well, Mr. President, as you know, Montana borders Canada. NAFTA's right. And he said, oh, Montana, he said. My favorite film was Cattle Queen of Montana. And he started talking about the film. He didn't care anybody. He didn't care two hoots about NAFTA. That's a bit of an exaggeration, not too much of an exaggeration. And so he talked about trying to get his horse across the stream. And he's kicking his horse went across the stream, and how a movie technician extra had a bean shooter, the well-placed bean. He finally got his horse across the stream. And his chief of staff, I think, was Don Regan at the time, trying to get him back on message here. He didn't care about that. And so often he'd tell stories, and they were great stories about this and that. And he's a communicator. I mean, he's good. And I like him too because he had a vision. He wanted to, it was during the Cold War. It's much easier to be president during the Cold War because it's them against us. When the Berlin Wall fell, I happened to be in Rio de Janeiro during the Earth Summit. And man, oh man, I could just feel it. The world cataclysmically changed. Tectonic plates are all shifting because countries and companies didn't have to care at all anymore under which national security umbrella they were under, either the United States or this former Soviet Union. They didn't have to care. It's irrelevant. And so back then, when Reagan's Cold War president, he liked, that job. I also appreciate him because he was the last president to get major tax reform passed. My view is it's very difficult to get major tax reform passed unless the president spends a lot of capital and is invested in it. He was. Subsequent presidents have not. Then we had the other Bushes. They're nice. George H. Bush, nicest guy in the world. But then when he speaks publicly or semi-publicly, a curtain fell. TV was not kind to him. And he was not, it's hard for him just to talk to the country, to the public. He wasn't uptight of it. But personally, the nicest guy in the world. I just loved the guy. George W., he's kind of a jock. We were sitting together once, White House. He's president sitting here, I'm sitting here. Before the meeting got started, I used to run a lot, I used to run a lot of marathons. And somebody said, oh, Max, you run a lot of marathons. What's your best time? So I mentioned my best time. Good Lord, President, what? He was so stunned and so impressed that we bonded as jocks. Not intellectually, not geographically. This is jocks. And he always called me Maxie after that. Hey, Maxie. Hey, Maxie. And let's see. Oh, gosh. Who else? Clinton was one of them. Clinton was really smart. Really smart. And he was in lots of ways. One small story. It's like, my job was really represent Montana as best I possibly could. There was an issue. Some of the budget cutters came with the idea to cut out these rural electric, I don't know, I forgot what it was. It's the power administrators, just to get rid of them all around the country. Well, a lot of us, eastern Montana especially, just were outraged, as true in other parts of the country. So I put together an effort to meet the President Clinton, 20, 30 members of the Senate, and why this is a bad idea. We met. And I spoke last because I organized the meeting. And I said, it's bad on policy, it's bad on politics. Don't do it. He looked across the table at Al Gore. It's Al Gore's idea. And he said, Al, why are we doing this? And Al said something lamely, and I tell you, Bill Clinton, you could tell, was very upset. He just, meeting's over. Enough of that. That was the end of that. Didn't hear another word. So he listened. He really did. Another time I spoke to him once was on China. And I did, as Wadad said, worked hard to help China get WTO, and there's tons of stories there. Anyway, just as you know, when he ran for president, he was very hard on Bush. He's the butcher of big jingles. I mean, he was very critical of George Bush. Who was kowtowing to China. No pun. And then once he got elected, Clinton, it always happens. Once you get elected, things look a little bit different. And he invited me over to the White House, talked to me about all this. We went up to the residence. He showed me his putters. I don't golf, so that's for years. That's nice, Mr. President. That's a nice putter. Anyway, he looked at me and said, what do we do about China? I said, we have to respect China. China's a country, we're a country. China has interests, we have interests. It's mutual self-respect, but we have to respect China. And he looked at me and didn't follow up much, and he gave me this stare. And I do think it had some effect on Clinton being a little more positive toward China and working in WTO and PNTR for China. That was kind of tough, that period. Small story there. The Zhu Rongji was premier of China at the time. Brilliant man. I admire him as much as anybody in the world. And anyway, I said to him, I will support you in WTO for China if you take Pacific Northwest wheat. Because China was not taking Pacific Northwest wheat. They'd take Canadian wheat, but not Pacific Northwest, not American wheat. He said, okay, it's a deal. And I had to remind him a couple of times afterwards. That's a deal. A deal's a deal. Very long story, very short. I was over afterwards and trying to help promote Pacific Northwest wheat in China. And met with one big minister, and he said, oh no, we didn't agree to that. I kept quiet. Another meeting, another minister. We didn't agree to that. I kept quiet. Third meeting, they again said, a vice minister of agriculture, no, we didn't agree to that. I let him have it, both barrels. I said, you will regret the day you don't honor this agreement. I urge you to reconsider, because you will rue the day that you reneged on this agreement. He just sat there. Final meeting with Premier Zhu at 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30. Finally, we got the meeting. I turned to him and said, he looked at me, he says, yep, that was the deal. It's sort of a lesson here, my judgment. If you stand up to anybody, including the Chinese, and work for what you know is right, you got to stick with it. When I was over in China, I developed what I call my 3 Ps. You got to be patient, positive, and persistent. You just got to stick with it. And but anyway, Clinton was good, and then after Obama, President Obama was, I mean, he really cared about, as you know, health care. That was his major issue, domestic issue. And we worked really hard in health care. That's a whole other story too. But I like work with him. Very smart. Here's a little fillip here. When I was chairman of the committee, he came in to see me. He said, Max, when he's a senator, I want to be on your committee, the Senate Finance Committee. And I said to Barack, well, Barack, I already have one senator on my committee who wants to be president. I don't need 2. It's John Kerry. And he said, well, that's fair. You know, if I run for president, then I don't want to be on your committee. But if I don't, I'd like to. So we talked about that. Should he not run for president? It was kind of a long conversation. The options were either run or to then become governor of Illinois, then run as governor. A little more experience, et cetera. Anyway, my advice was you got to strike when the iron's hot. That brass ring only comes around once, mostly. So he said, yeah, I know. But I promised Michelle that if I do run, I will be a good family person. I won't, you know, I'll be around. Because that's important to me, it's important to Michelle, the kids, and so forth. Well, you know, a year or 2 later, finally passed the health care bill, House and Senate. We're at the White House, sitting across from the table. House members over here, I'm sitting across, other senators over here, and I'm representing the Senate. Nancy Pelosi is representing the House. And about 7 o'clock, no earlier, it was 5 o'clock, 5:30, President Obama stood up and said, well, got to go. What do you mean got to go? We haven't finished here. He said, no, Sasha is in a play tonight, and I'm going to go to the play. So I really respected that. I mean, he's doing what he said he was going to do, and anyway. So they're all, you know, they're wonderful men.
Stay with the Affordable Care Act. As chair of Senate Finance, you were one of the major architects of that. How do you think that it's worked out in practice, and what are your thoughts on the future direction healthcare in the U.S.?
Yeah. Again, long stories, and I'll try to keep it shorter. I really threw myself into it because we did not have a healthcare system in America. Basically, everybody's doing his own thing. Doctors, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment manufacturers, it's just a free-for-all. Providing healthcare, but making a buck. It was a free-for-all. Other countries had their systems. We didn't. We had to. And other countries pay much less per capita healthcare than we, 3 times less, and their outcomes are better than ours. We had to do something. So I worked really hard on this. In 15 months, it was wonderful. Republicans, Democrats working together. Came out with our white paper in November 2018. It was all other committees passed legislation based on that white paper. There's a healthcare economist named Uwe Reinhardt from Princeton. He testified before our committee once, and he held it up. And he says, "This is the best I've seen. I'm using it for my classes." And we're really proud of it. The main goals were coverage, get more people health insurance, and we succeeded, 20 million more. Another goal was to change the way the government reimburses providers, because it's based too much on procedures, on volume, not enough on outcomes, and so forth. And the third was to cut costs. Well, we did well on number 1, so-so on number 2, and not very well on number 3. Cutting to the quick here, what has to be done? Why do we spend so much more as Americans on healthcare than other countries? It's pretty simple, frankly. One is other countries have single-payer systems. And under single-payer, underpay, they have various variations. You know, the government pays providers. In the United States, we don't, obviously. Backing up a little bit, when I put the committee, we worked on healthcare, my goals were, okay, everything's on the table. Everything, all Americans involved, either as consumers of healthcare or as payers of healthcare. We're all together as Americans. This is an all-American solution here. And if anybody wants to take anything off the table, first of all, nothing's off the table. Although I did take one thing off the table, that's single pay. Because I felt at that time, this country could not pass a single-payer system. We're going to get there, but not at that time. I came up with what I called, we have to have a uniquely American solution. Combination of single pay and go west, young man, free market, United States. And that's what we did. So I think we should very seriously consider a single payer system. I think number 2, we should have something that's called negotiated price for Medicare drugs. We don't negotiate price. And as a consequence, everybody in this room, you're all subsidizing drug costs in other countries. Because other countries negotiate price. Other countries, Great Britain, France, whatever, goes to pharmaceuticals, say, okay, we're only going to pay you this. We're not going to pay you anymore. And we're the only payer, so our price counts. And it's not so in America. The pharmaceuticals just fight it tooth and nail. They hate it. When we put the bill together to get coverage and all these other things, it cost $1 trillion over 10 years. But we found $1 trillion. It was all paid for. The providers coughed it up. Hospitals, pharmaceuticals, they all did. Why? Because with additional coverage, be more patients, they could make it up. And that's what we did. Right now, right now, President Trump and the Republicans are trying to undermine what we did. And so the single payer, the individual market starts to collapse. And it's really, I think it's tragic. But I think we have to think about single pay, negotiated price. And also, our administrative costs are much higher than other countries. Why are our administrative costs much higher? Look at it. All the insurance, variations of insurance, private, public, and so forth. And another thing, I remember with Hillary Care, went up to have her have our hospital as one floor dedicated to claims processing. Another floor is healthcare. Well, I want to check out the Canadian system. So I went up to Edmonton. And a huge big hospital, one little room for claims processing. Why? Because in Canada, Alberta, you just show that you're a Canadian resident. You don't have to show you're a citizen, that you're a resident. And you get taken care of. If it's emergency care. If it's discretionary, you got to stand in line. Anyway, I'm sure anybody here hears this. I might say we got to look at all the health insurance forms and all that. They're going to really be upset. But my personal view is we've got to start looking at single pay. And I saw an American doctor up there in Edmonton. He was an orthopod from San Diego. And I said, how much you making? He said, about $200,000. What are you doing up here in Edmonton? You could back in San Diego make over $1 million a year. And he said, no, I like it up here. It's, I can practice medicine. I don't have to worry about all the hassle that American doctors go through. No tort liability issues here to speak of. And I can practice medicine. So, and you talk to a lot of doctors who are salaried who do like it because they don't have to. Those are changes I'd make. I think we should have hearings on single pay. Look into it and take a year or 2 or 3. We're getting there. It's going to happen.
North Korea. As ambassador to China, you obviously were in the front line of dealing with the whole issue of North Korea and nuclear weapons. And I think we'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on, I mean, we seem to be between a rock and a hard place on this. I mean, what is the way forward here? Is there a way forward with this regime? And what, should be the U.S., how should the U.S. and China work on this issue?
Yeah. Well, I think fundamentally, we as Americans have to realize that the big boy on the block is China. China's not going anywhere. China is the second largest economy in the world. We're the largest. We all know 10, 15, 20 years, their economy will exceed that of ours. With the annual growth rate of close to 7%, it doubles every 10 years. Their military spending doubles every 5 years. We got to work with China. My view is, generally, the better we, as Americans and Chinese, mutually handle that relationship in a solid way, the more likely that the standard of living of our kids and our grandkids will be better in the world than if we don't. It's part of the old Thucydides trap question. Before going over there, I read Kissinger's book on China. He talks about, rising powers, established powers. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. He talks a lot about the Chinese approaches to problems. And it's like Wei Qi and Go and board games and salami slicing and long-term vision, strategic, etc. It's really true. And the problem in North Korea, as you all know, is, there's an awful lot of history of China and North Korea. In the Korean War, Mao didn't think we'd get too involved, but when Kim Jong's grandfather, Kim, came down in South Korea, South Korea pushed back, and so Mao sent over 1 million Chinese in North Korea to push in the Korean peninsula to pull us down, because there's a very deep involvement Chinese do in the peninsula. And they didn't think we were going to come, but we did. And it's important to remember that we Americans bombed the bejeebies out of North Korea. So Kim Jong-un, the current Kim.
Oh, Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un, right. He just, it's just a great propaganda tool. Those Americans, look what they did to us. They've got those ships out there on shore. Look, they want to contain us and bomb us. And he controls all the media. And we're, in a certain sense, playing into all this. Now, from the Chinese perspective, Kim Jong-un, from the Chinese perspective, maybe a lot of people know that, but I think it's good to remind us. We're back up. When I would talk to Koreans, Chinese often about Kim Jong-un. And the main guy is a guy named Wu Da-wei. He's their main negotiator and has been for 20 years. And it is like talking to a brick wall, nothing. And I'm very candid, kind of embarrassed. Whenever we, with President Obama, Secretary Kerry, others would come over and talk to the Chinese about various issues, including this, it was not very solid. It was a little superficial, like checking the box, not thought through, from my perspective. And when Trump became president, a little more of the same. Even more difficult because Trump had different messages, like hot and cold and so forth. And so from the Chinese perspective, the Chinese they have a neuralgic obsession with security and stability and legitimacy, the party. And they will do almost anything to maintain their legitimacy as the party. And that means stability, and that's economic and political stability. And they're very concerned if there's instability on the peninsula, that tons of refugees that come over into China cause havoc. But more important, with an unstable peninsula, who knows what might happen? Who knows who might succeed Kim? Probably the Americans will join with South Koreans, and they'll be in control of the peninsula. China will not stand idly by if the peninsula becomes unstable. Korea's next door, and they don't want an unfavorable country next door. They want a favorable country next door. So they want stability. They'd rather currently deal with this fellow like Kim Jong-un, who they don't like at all, and take the risk that this could be managed. So they don't have to do what they could do, which is cut off oil supply and they could do a lot more if they really wanted to. But they don't want to because they have right now power. So what do we do? My judgment is, in today's New York Times, there's an article, it really kind of upset me a little bit. This guy wrote an article about why we're not doing very well in Korea. And the whole tone of the article is, well, because all our sticks aren't working. Do this, do that, do this. Well, of course. I mean, we need carrots as well as sticks. What's that book, Folger wrote this book about everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten? I mean, you got to treat people with respect if you want to get anywhere, and it's both, you got to push, but you got to, with carrots and sticks and so forth. So what could we do? Here's my thought. That we say, okay, China, you don't like this young boy Kim over there. He's causing all these problems. Why don't we start thinking about how we deal with this and what's next? If I'm China, I'm thinking, okay, I want to know what the end game here is. End game is on the peninsula. Who's in charge, who's not? End game is, what about you Americans? What do you do in the South China Sea? End game is, you Americans, what about those forces you got, those ships that you got there off the Korean Peninsula? There can be a deal. And then China might do what it needs to do and force Kim to the negotiating table. What Kim really cares about is legitimacy, no regime change. He's very cleverly, smartly positioned himself to get all this attention. And my judgment is that there's going to come a time when he's thinking, okay, I've got maximum amount of power right now, so maybe we can start doing the deals. So long as, this is the tough part for him, I'm still the man. I still have almost as much power as I had before. Because you know, he watched what happened to Saddam Hussein. He watched what happened to Gaddafi. They made a big mistake, according to him. So probably there'll be some kind of a freeze. So he'll still have something so we can keep some leverage of some kind that start to, but the road through a Kim solution is through China. And it's working with Japan, South Korea, and so forth, but it's in the UN and other countries, but China's the it's the key in my judgment. I've suggested this to a couple of people. It's getting a little traction. I'm being very presumptuous now, thinking it's an approach that really makes sense. But it's the best I can come up with, and I do think it will, because look, in the long run, we've got to work with China, and they want to work with us. We're joined together at the hip economically. There's not going to be a trade war. They don't want a trade war. We don't want a trade war. That's stupid to suggest there might be a trade war. It's not going to happen. But we've got to. There's a lot of subjects here. Once we develop more trust with China, then we can start working out some of this. We won't always agree. We're going to have to stand up for what we believe in and say, okay, China can't go any farther. But there has to be a much better dialogue / understanding of what we can do. It's going to take immense shuttle diplomacy. It's going to take immense back and forth and different people, different levels to get to know each other better. It takes time. It takes time. And it is going to be so hard because our system of government is based on process and negotiation and so forth. Theirs is more in results. This is what we want. But we got to live with each other. And I think China will want to reach some accommodation with us.
I'm a political parties guy in my teaching, and so I have to ask you this one. You've been, you were renowned as a moderate Democrat during your congressional career, and you had a phenomenally successful electoral record in a conservative state. So I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the future direction of the Democratic Party and where they should be going.
Well, some hardcore Democrats would fault me for not being sufficiently partisan. But you are who you are. You can only do what you think is right and best. I remember Mike Mansfield once saying, I am who I am. That really struck me. And after I got elected in his House, Mike said to me, now, Max, remember, you represent Republicans as well as Democrats. He didn't have to tell me that. I knew that. Because I represent all of Montana. I'm a Montanan. Montana's first, the people are first, and the party is second. And sure, I've got my values. I talked about single pay just now, and labor rights and laws and so forth, but you got to find results. And I just like to get results which are, right and fair and reasonable and so forth. And it's not quite on point exactly, but my view has been that if you really work hard and meet people as much as you can and explain to people at town meetings, whatever, why you're listening to other person's point of view, but if they explain why you're doing what you're doing. And I think 70% will say, okay, I may not totally agree, but at least he's listening to me. At least he's thought about some of the other considerations, and that's okay. He's back there and that kind of thing. Forget the 15% in the far right and the 15% in the far left. They're lost anyway. But it's try to do that. Second, this sounds corny, but it's true. I really care about Montana and fighting for Montana. When I got back there, I realized, holy mackerel, we got a problem. Rural states kind of get lost out when money's divided up, and with its highway is a separate story. But rural, but healthcare, and you name it. And I put together something called the Rural Healthcare Caucus for rural states. We put the thing called medical assistive facilities and a special way to get hospital payments for small Montana hospitals, et cetera. And the highway bill. I spent a lot of time bringing highway dollars to Montana. 19th Avenue, I did that. I made a lot of people wealthy. The Belgrade interchange, Helen interchanges, Shiloh, you name them. Those are the days when we had earmarks and you could do it. I think it's wrong that we got rid of earmarks. Why? Because earmarks, most of them, 90%, they're good, not wasted. And they're the glue to help members of Congress work together and this and on and so forth. Now if they're gone, it's a little antiseptic. We were too politically correct. We got bamboozled by the press. And because they're terrible. Press, oh, earmarks, earmarks. But anyway, and we're a highway state, probably more than any other state. And in the vernacular, we're a donee state. We get a lot more money than we spend on highway gasoline tax. And so I think part of it helped that I worked really hard for the state. And Bob Dead mentioned agriculture. I worked hard to make sure we had good farm bills for Montana, and always, support payments and all that. And then I really cared a lot about conservation in our state. I worked very hard for open space, the legacy of in northern Montana, 300,000 acres. And I did that. In North Fork, Eastern Front, stopped the Crown Butte down in Yellowstone Park. Bill Clinton asked me once to Max, he's back here, what do you think about that, Max? I said, bad idea. I didn't have to say any more. That's the end of it. So I'm just working hard. And I mean it. I mean, really cared. I'm a bit of a workaholic at times. I only care. And being so available to people. Walking in the lion's den. I love walking into the lion's den. It's a challenge. And the whole card is, Max, you'll learn something, but it's, basically, and they might learn something too. The most favorite, one of my favorites, and I'll try to keep this short, part of it was I loved it. I called them work days. Almost one day a month, I'd show up 8 o'clock in the morning, some job in Montana, with my sack lunch, work all day long. Didn't want to watch when it worked. Wait tables, sawmills, operating equipment, scrapers out here out of town. You name mines, in the Stillwater mine, they worked jack drills in the Stillwater mine, so on and so forth. Once I was riding on shotgun with Zip Beverage outside of Missoula. We were all around delivering kegs of beer. Gosh, the depot over there in Missoula, first big keg, holy man. I about went down the basement with this keg, they're heavy. and pop, the taverns and so forth. Anyway, the end of the day is the airport bar, and this big old guy, I said, I want to walk over and shake hands with this guy. I'm like, I know who you are. Anyway, well, just stand up. Remember that movie, Dr. Strangelove? Arm down, it's going to pop up. I kept wondering, is he going to shake my hand or not? Raging battle going inside of him. Is he going to shake my hand or not? Finally, he stood up. He's a big guy, and he looked at me. This is after I voted for the Brady bill and for the so-called Feinstein ban on the manufacturing of assault rifles. And by the way, that was a big deal. I was the most popular public servant in the state before then. Mark Roscoe and I just went like that. And that's a whole other subject. And anyway, he says, this guy's big guy says, are you going to come tonight and tell us why you made them gun votes? Well, who are you? We're the Association to Protect the Second Amendment. How many? About 200, 300. What time? 6:30. I already had an appointment then, but I wanted to go. My office, later, don't go. First thing we'll do. And I had a TV interview at 6 o'clock. First question, are you going to go to this meeting? I knew it. They're going to leak it. Well, I decided I was going to go, but I want to get there late and not be set up. And I'm afraid if I go on time, they'll have all the TV cameras there, just give me the dickens in front of the TV cameras, and that just, it's not going to accomplish anything. I arrived 40 minutes late. Sure enough, TV van's driving away. I was really lucky. And also lucky, I was working for Zip Beverage, so I had my jeans and my black Budweiser shirt on, and so I want the moment, I want surprise, and keep my cool. I said, Max, whatever you do, you got to keep your calm. You're not going to let anything happen to get under your skin here. Walked up and anyway, cut to the quick here, and they put me on the program. I said, and they're at 0-20 here. They were just what you'd expect. I said, just let me speak 5 minutes, uninterrupted. Just let me speak 5 minutes, and then we'll let her rip. They let me speak 5 minutes. I said, well, sure enough, all hell broke loose. I mean, all these things. Any Fed crosses my doorstep, he's a dead Fed. And I'll bet a third of them thought that Clinton was pre-positioning military troops out in the woods. They said so. They had photographs. They had proof. and I'm not exaggerating. And the big guy at the end of the room, some great big guy, always big guy. He stood up and said, Senator Baucus, that is your title. You're an unsenator. You'll never be a senator again. You violated your oath of office, the Montana Constitution, the United States Constitution. And when they finished, somebody turned to me and said, well, sir, yeah, I hear you. That's a position you hold fervently. It's heartfelt, sincerely felt, and I respect that. But I urge you to listen to what I said and give some thought to what I just said. You could feel the tension in the room fall. Something happened. Then pretty soon evolved to a political science seminar. Do you support the 10th Amendment of the Constitution? Of course I support the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. Support the Second Amendment, 10th Amendment, all. And well, why do we need a federal government? We states can do it. 10th Amendment, that's enough. And so we talked about that a while. Supremacy clause and all so forth. And I said, we could decide right here and now which parts of the Constitution we're going to support, or are we going to support the entire Constitution? Oh, that's a whole new concept, because these are fervent constitutionalists. And it was at the end of the hour and a half, I couldn't believe it. I got a standing ovation. Now, not the most exuberant in the world, but they got up. And I kept asking myself, what happened here? And I think part of it is just respect. I showed up, I was there and so forth. But that was, so I just think it's so important, whatever you do in life, whether it's public service, whatever, just show up, be there. 80% of life is showing up, just being there. And it's fun. So it goes to the earlier question, anyway, you might think about running for public office. It is fun. It is really good. People are wonderful.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and we have some mics out there. So I think we can take some questions for Ambassador Baucus. Keep them relatively short, please.
Yeah, I'll try to keep my answers shorter, too.
All right, 10 or 15 years ago, Harper's Magazine had a piece about Chinese surveillance. If you said 1989 or Tiananmen Square or even white guy on computer, you put on a watch list. But then it just recently we found that through the Freedom of Information Act that an American will be put on a watch list if he writes wave or cloud or gas or even pork or Mexico. Since you've been under surveillance in both China and America, how do you compare China and America's depth of surveillance?
Thank you.
Are you serious? No, I know, there's no comparison. Everything in China is surveilled. I don't think everything in America is surveilled. Everything China is. And you just have to accept it. It's a problem. In addition, post Eric Snowden, the Chinese have battened down the hatches to protect their national security, then use that excuse to keep American companies out by passing national security statutes, cybersecurity statutes, and so on and so forth. It's a real problem. And the Chinese are suppressing civil society much more. Every month something else comes up. And it's Xi Jinping thinks that they're pretty smart, a lot smarter than the Soviets, than the Russians. Why? China, have opened up their economy. They pursued economic reform. They are not pursuing political reform. The mistake they think Russia made is political reform. And that's when Russia collapsed, from their view. So, and there's more and more surveillance. It's getting to the point where they have a social credit system developing now. It's not just financial credit, but it's your social credit, like what do you do, and so forth. It's worrisome.
This gentleman.
Good evening, Ambassador. My name is Tony Cerise, and way back in 2004, I was the Bobcat from Butte intern with the Senate Finance Committee. So you were very proud. It had been a little dry spell from MSU, too many from the other school there for a while, so thank you for that. But in the past few years, and I spent several years in DC working with college students and talking politics and talking legislative process, it seems the last few years it's been a light year in changing and the polarization of partisanship, and the Senate almost has seemed to kind of take on a mentality of the House of Representatives. I certainly see the rationale for why we did it way back then, but what do you think hypothetically the Senate would look like today without the 17th Amendment, where states were choosing senators and people were choosing their representatives, and you had one body I think if you asked the average voter what the state budget is in Montana, they couldn't come within several $1 million. And so it seems like both bodies are now hypersensitive to the next election and what constituents say they want and demand as opposed to what states really need.
Well, it's an interesting question. It is true the Senate is becoming more like the House. It is true that it's majority rule, and part of that's the tyranny of the majority. I don't know that back before the 17th Amendment is the answer, because all those dollars that come over the transom, as legislators would be bribed, if you will, in who they're going to elect or not elect, at least to the Senate. So your real question is what? I missed it.
There we go. So I definitely, to the point of money over the transom, and of course being from Butte, we had a little bit of a role in that. Not sure that you could get away with it that much today with as much media and social media as there is. But even in that situation, it seems that we've just now got two really dysfunctional houses, two dysfunctional chambers, and really along the same rationale, because everybody's so focused on the next election. It would maybe even solve some of the fundraising for those positions, because now you're going and advocating to state legislators, right, and being selected in that level. Yeah. So you have to spend a little less time raising that money as well.
Well, before I answer, or try to answer, I want to just take my hat off and applaud lots of people in this room. Dorothy Bradley, Dorothy Egg, Bill Yellowtail, Bob Brown, other legislators who really poured their heart and soul out to represent our state. I can remember Dorothy saying many, many, many years ago, and just stuck with me. She says, her basic point was, it's the right point. People are in charge. And Dorothy, you talked about some problems are on the front burners, the stove. Some problems legislators have are in the back burners. And as a citizen, you got to talk to your legislator enough to make sure that the issues you care more about are the front burners, not the back burners. I mean, it was compelling, and it's true. So what, you know, the House and Senate, you know, whether it's D.C. or Helena, it doesn't matter. You are in charge. I'm just a hired hand. I'm just, you know, the employee. You're the employer. All in the room here are employers. But people have to act a lot more like employers. And you'd be surprised. I've seen senators, Montana delegation turned around when people home started calling, writing letters and so forth. I know it's hard to do, but we are a democracy. What's the future of America? I was struck years ago by a book by Paul Kennedy. It's Rise and Fall of Nations, something like that. And he points out, and I think it's basically true, if you look at the sweep of history, countries, civilizations rise and fall. Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, UK. And we're a young country. What guarantee is there that the United States is going to continue to rise forever? Well, there's no guarantee. And the probabilities are not great, given how fast things move these days. So my answer to that is, our American future is assured the more two conditions occur. One, a very educated electorate. And we touched on it earlier, people have to think much more critically and decide for themselves, is that person right or not right? Not do what that person says. You can ask questions. A very educated electorate. That's hard work. Democracy is really hard work. It's to get the information, to go online, dig, look, read critically, and just think critically. I think that's one of the most important things that a university system, secondary school system can do, is teach students to think critically. When I say critical, I don't mean negative. I just mean analytically. Dig down, figure out what's right, what's not right. That is so, so important. So number one, an educated electorate. Number two is an involved electorate. You got to do something about it. Once you've figured out who's right or not right, do something about it. Don't just sit on your hands. It's easy to sit in your hands. It's hard to kind of do something about it. But you'd be amazed. I'm not exaggerating. You'd be amazed if you got involved on some issue, especially if you're all together. I won't go that far. It's the difference you could make. And what works better is telephone calls. Okay, you have a huge advantage, all of us in Montana, compared with Californians. Our population is 1 million. California is about 30-some, 40 million, whatever it is. So you are 30 to 40 times more powerful than the Californians. You got to take advantage of it. And so you could call our senators, you know, Daines and Tester, and insist they take the call. And always, oh, I'm sorry, he's busy right now. Oh, leave your names. Oh, and call every week or so on that issue. Pretty soon they go, oh my God, he's calling me. I better answer that call. I can get him off my back anyway. I tell you, we're so lucky as Montanans, and we're lucky in the sense that, look, people have said it's true, Montana's one big small town. It is true. It's wonderful. It's taking advantage of it. The other states can't. So I don't care if it's House, Senate, or just get involved at all levels.
This is going to have to be the last one, sir.
Max, want to thank you for the current generations and our future generations for your work on the Rocky Mountain Front Heritage Act. I remember maybe 10 years ago you said one of the greatest sacrifices that you gave in public service was to give up your time horseback in Montana. And so I hope now that you're home, some of those miles back in the saddle can be along the Rocky Mountain Front. And then the other question I had is, we listen and have watched and listened tonight, do you think that the goodness and the wholesomeness and the caring and the respect that is so much a part of your identity and personality, and the Montana character can be something that in a moment of crisis or ambiguity on the world stage, like we face in China and North Korea, the lasting goodness that you brought to that part of the world from Montana might be something that tips the future towards a good resolution because of the good work that you've done and the great experience that you've had growing up in this state.
Well, all I know is we're all incredibly lucky. Often in meetings, I try to remind ourselves, just step back and think how blessed we are to be Americans, how lucky we are to be Americans. Just stop and think about it for a few, all of us, for 10 seconds, 15, to begin the discussion. Begin with a sense of appreciation of what we are and what we have. And then just think how lucky we are to be Montanans. Look how lucky we are. And it's making best use of that and using that. Using that as leverage or ground, the kind of energy to go forward. Doesn't really answer your question, but I'll try to be really quick here. In China, when I arrived, I found something that was really nutty. Well, you go to have these meetings, you meet with the top general, the top government official. He or she, usually he, has his talking points, which are prepared for him to read, sitting across the table. My crack staff prepared my talking points, which I'd read. It was nuts. It was just too formal. So right away, I just did something I thought was a little un-Montana, a little un-American. I just interrupted them. Constructively, not personally. Say, well, can you give me an example of that, please? Explain that, please. I developed a reputation for being candid and kind of Montana-like, and they loved it. They really respected it because it was not the usual State Department formality, which is kind of boring, waste of time, usually. And then I questioned about the relationship, U.S.-China. Well, it's candor. Chinese like candor. I think they even like candor more than Americans do, strangely. Chinese believe more in their future, positive, than the Americans do. It's because they've gone so far. They've done so much. And I'll just finish here by saying, I urge everybody here, spend a lot of time thinking about China. Go to China. Taste it, smell it, feel it, see it. You'd be stunned, absolutely stunned what they're doing. China produces half the world's coal, half the world's steel, half the world's aluminum, 75% of the world's air conditioners. More miles of high-speed rail than all the rest of the world combined. Their trains, new ones, will go with 200 miles an hour. It's soft, quiet. You think you're in a sleepy, it's amazing. Terminals, air terminals, train terminals. It's stunning. It's stunning. And I know there are just problems. You know, everybody's got problems. People talk about over-leverage, overcapacity in China and this and that. But, you know, my view is they're smart people. That's another point. We Americans, I think, tend to indulge a little bit too much in exceptionalism. We tend to think we have the answers. We don't. We're Americans. We're proud of who we are. We'd have to respect them because they're proud of who they are. And we're not better. We're not smarter. Vietnam was based partly on American arrogance, in my judgment. We're superior. Oh, we'll beat them. We do a lot of that worldwide. Anyway, I had to spend a lot of time, did spend a lot of time, the staff saying, look, we're not better. Let's not let any condescension creep into things that we're doing. And I answered the question about North Korea. I think the more we treat China equally, knowing they're different, but equally standing up for ourselves. We're not going to let them push us around. But about our self-respect, I think we'll do better.
Max, thank you very much for sharing your reflections on politics, policy, public life with us this evening. Welcome back to Montana.
It's good to be home.
Thank you.